Hatshepsut. Supposed to be a placeholder. When her husband, Pharaoh Thutmose II, died, their son was too young to rule, so Hatshepsut became regent, just keeping the throne warm. That was the plan. But Hatshepsut had other ideas. Within 7 years, she declared herself pharaoh, not queen, pharaoh. The problem? Egypt had never had a female pharaoh. Their entire religious system said pharaohs had to be male, the living embodiment of the god Horus. So, Hatshepsut created one of history's greatest disguises. She ordered artists to depict her as a man. In statues, paintings, and carvings, she wore the traditional false beard of the pharaohs. She dressed in male royal regalia. She even had herself shown with a bare, muscular chest. Inscriptions referred to her using male pronouns. She ruled Egypt for 22 years, one of the longest reigns of any pharaoh. Under her rule, Egypt didn't wage war. Instead, she focused on trade. She launched a famous expedition to the land of Punt, bringing back gold, ivory, and exotic animals. She built monuments that still stand today, including her stunning mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. But after her death, someone tried to erase her from history. Many of her images were defaced, her name chiseled off monuments. Most historians think her stepson Thutmose III did it, wanting to eliminate any questions about his legitimacy. They failed. Hatshepsut is now remembered as one of ancient Egypt's most successful pharaohs. She proved a woman could rule as well as any man. She just had to wear a fake beard to do it.
Wu Zetian started as a concubine. At 14, she entered the imperial palace as one of Emperor Taizong's many women. When he died, she should have been sent to a Buddhist monastery for the rest of her life. That was the rule for imperial concubines. Instead, she seduced the new emperor, Taizong's son. She became his empress. But that wasn't enough. Her husband suffered from debilitating strokes, so Wu began ruling from behind a screen. Literally. In Chinese court tradition, empresses sat behind a yellow silk curtain during official meetings. The emperor sat in front. But Wu made all the decisions while her sick husband just nodded. When he died in 683, she put her sons on the throne, one after another. They were puppets. She exiled the first one after 6 weeks for disagreeing with her. The second son ruled in name only, while Wu controlled everything from behind that curtain. Finally, in 690, she stopped pretending. At age 67, Wu Zetian declared herself emperor. Not empress, emperor. The first and only woman in Chinese history to hold that title in her own name. She ruled ruthlessly. She created a secret police network. She encouraged people to report on each other. Thousands of officials were executed or exiled. But she also promoted talented people based on merit, not birth. She expanded the empire, she supported Buddhism, and commissioned massive religious projects. When she died at 81, her son took back the throne. Confucian historians spent centuries condemning her as a power-hungry monster, but modern historians see her differently. A brilliant politician who played the game better than any man and won.
Empress Dowager Cixi entered the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine at 16. She was beautiful and clever, but she had one crucial advantage. She gave the emperor his only son. When the emperor died in 1861, her 5-year-old boy became emperor. Cixi became regent. The rule was simple. She would guide him until he was old enough to rule alone. Then she'd step aside. She never stepped aside. For 47 years, Cixi controlled China from behind a yellow silk curtain. In the throne room, the child emperor sat on the throne. Cixi sat behind him, hidden from view, whispering instructions. Officials could hear her voice, but never address her directly. Everything went through the emperor. When her son died at 19 in 1875, probably from syphilis, Cixi should have lost power. Instead, she adopted her 3-year-old nephew and made him emperor. She stayed behind the curtain. In 1889, when he turned 18 and tried to reform China without her permission, Cixi staged a coup.
She put him under house arrest and took direct control again. He remained emperor in name only, a prisoner in his own palace. Cixi modernized China's military, built railways, and reformed the education system. But she also spent millions restoring the Summer Palace while China starved. She supported the Boxer Rebellion against foreigners, which backfired catastrophically. She died in 2008, one day after her imprisoned nephew mysteriously died. Many historians believe she had him poisoned to ensure he wouldn't outlive her and take revenge. For nearly half a century, the most powerful person in China was a woman nobody was allowed to see.
Queen Nzinga. When Nzinga walked into the Portuguese governor's office in 1622, she was there to negotiate on behalf of her brother, the king. The governor offered her no chair. It was a deliberate insult, forcing her to stand like a servant while he sat above her. Nzinga didn't hesitate. She ordered one of her attendants to get on all fours, then she sat on the woman's back and negotiated as an equal. When the meeting ended, she left the human chair behind as a gift. The message was clear. Nzinga bowed to no one. A year later, her brother died mysteriously. Many think Nzinga poisoned him. She took the throne, but the Portuguese and rival tribes refused to accept a female ruler. So Nzinga changed the game. She started dressing in men's clothing and weapons. She surrounded herself with male warriors. She took multiple husbands, which was traditionally a male privilege, and forced them to dress as women. She insisted on being called King Nzinga, not Queen. For 40 years, she fought the Portuguese on the slave trade. She led armies personally, fighting into her 60s. She formed alliances with the Dutch. She turned her kingdom into a refuge for escaped slaves and runaway warriors. The Portuguese called her a witch and a savage, but they couldn't defeat her. She outlasted 4 Portuguese governors. Nzinga died at 80, still ruling, still fighting. She never surrendered. Today, she's remembered as one of Africa's greatest military leaders. She proved that ruling as a woman meant refusing to play by men's rules.
Tamar of Georgia. When Tamar inherited the throne of Georgia at 18, the noble thought they could control her. She was young, beautiful, and female. They'd marry her off to someone strong, and he'd be the real ruler. They were wrong. At her coronation, Tamar demanded to be crowned king, not queen. Georgian had different words for each. She chose the male title deliberately. Official documents called her King of Kings, Queen of Queens. She wanted the authority of a king with the legitimacy of being the royal daughter. The nobles forced her to marry a Russian prince, but he turned out to be a drunk who treated her terribly. So Tamar did something almost unheard of. She divorced him. A woman, a Christian ruler, getting divorced in the 12th century. The church was furious. The nobles were shocked. Tamar didn't care. She exiled her ex-husband and married a military commander of her own choice. Then she went to war. Under King Tamar, Georgia entered its golden age. She conquered neighboring territories, expanded the empire to its largest size ever, and crushed multiple rebellions. She supported artists, built monasteries, and made Georgia a center of culture and learning. Poets wrote about her as a warrior queen. Chroniclers described her leading troops. She disguised her gender through title while never hiding that she was a woman. When she died around age 50, Georgia was at its peak of power and prosperity. To this day, Georgians call her era the Georgian Renaissance, and they still call her King Tamar, just like she demanded.
Nur Jahan. A 34-year-old widow with a daughter when Emperor Jahangir fell in love with her. In 1611, she became his 20th wife. Within months, she was the power behind the Mughal throne. Jahangir was an alcoholic who preferred wine and opium to governing. Nur Jahan took over. But as a woman in Mughal India, she couldn't rule openly. So she created an invisible government. She sat behind a screen during official meetings. Courtiers presented petitions to Jahangir, but Nur Jahan made the decisions.
Ambassadors knew the real ruler was behind that curtain. They addressed their letters to her. She went further than any Mughal woman before her. She issued coins with her name on them. No Mughal queen had ever done that. The coins read, "By order of the King Jahangir, gold has 100 splendors added to it by receiving the name of Nur Jahan." She designed gardens, commissioned buildings, and led military campaigns. When her husband was captured by rebels in 1626, Nur Jahan personally led the rescue mission. She commanded troops herself and negotiated his release. For 16 years, she was the real emperor. Foreign visitors wrote that nothing happened without Nur Jahan's approval. The British ambassador said the government lies entirely in the hands of the Queen. But when Jahangir died in 1627, her power died with him. The new emperor exiled her. She spent her last 18 years confined to a pension, writing poetry. Nur Jahan proved that women could rule an empire. They just had to let men think they were still in charge.
Olga of Kiev. Married to Igor, ruler of Kievan Rus, when a neighboring tribe murdered him over a tax dispute, the Drevlians had beaten him to death. Then they made a terrible mistake. They sent ambassadors to Olga asking her to marry their prince. They thought a widow would be easy to manipulate. They didn't know Olga. She received the ambassadors warmly, then suggested they deserved an honor. She had them carried in their boat to a great feast. Her men carried them straight into a pit and buried them alive. Then Olga sent a message, saying yes, she'd marry their prince. She asked the Drevlians to send their best men to escort her. They sent their nobles. She had them locked in a bathhouse and burned alive. Still in disguise, Olga traveled to Drevlian territory and asked to hold a funeral feast at her husband's grave. The Drevlians agreed. After getting them drunk, her soldiers killed 5,000 of them. Finally, Olga besieged their capital city. When they begged for mercy, she asked for a simple tribute, 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. Confused but relieved, they agreed. Olga's soldiers tied burning cloths to the birds' legs and released them. The birds flew home to their nests. The entire city burned down. After her revenge was complete, Olga ruled Kievan Rus as regent for her son for 18 years. She was brilliant at diplomacy, reformed the tax system, and converted to Christianity, becoming the first Russian ruler to do so. The Orthodox Church made her a saint who buried people alive and burned cities down. She ruled with absolute authority, but only after disguising her intentions until it was too late.
Christina of Sweden became Queen of Sweden at age 6 when her father died in battle. She was raised as a prince. Her father had wanted a son, so when Christina was born, he ordered her educated like a boy. She learned Latin, Greek, philosophy, and military strategy. As she grew up, Christina refused to act like a traditional queen. She wore men's clothing, she swore like a soldier, she called herself king in some documents. She rode horses astride instead of side saddle. Courtiers were scandalized. When she took full power at 18, the pressure to marry became intense. Sweden needed an heir, but Christina refused every suitor. Rumors spread about her sexuality and her relationship with her lady-in-waiting, Ebba Spari. Christina made an unprecedented decision. At 27, she abdicated the throne. She gave up one of Europe's most powerful crowns voluntarily. Then she did something even more shocking. She traveled to Rome, converted to Catholicism, and had herself crowned wearing men's clothing. Before leaving Sweden, she'd been caught in a huge scandal. She'd ordered the execution of her servant for treason, but evidence suggested she'd murdered him to cover up a secret. Free from the throne, Christina lived in Rome as an openly gender non-conforming intellectual. She hosted salons with Europe's greatest minds. She wore men's clothes openly. She had passionate relationships with both men and women. She tried to become Queen of Naples and Poland, but failed. Christina never married, never had children, and never returned to Sweden.
She died in Rome at 62. She'd rather give up a kingdom than pretend to be someone she wasn't.
Theodora. Born into the lowest class of Byzantine society, her father was a bear keeper in the circus. When he died, her mother had to put her daughters on stage as entertainers. In Byzantine culture, actresses were considered barely better than prostitutes. Theodora became famous for scandalous performances. Ancient sources describe her dancing nearly naked and performing in obscene theatrical shows. She had a daughter out of wedlock. She was everything Byzantine society despised. Then she met Justinian, nephew of the emperor. He fell in love with her. When he wanted to marry her, there was a problem. Byzantine law forbade senators from marrying actresses. Justinian had to get his uncle to change the law. In 527, Justinian became emperor, and Theodora became empress. The former circus actress now sat on the throne of the Roman Empire. Nobles who'd once mocked her now had to bow before her. But Theodora didn't just play the role of empress, she became co-ruler. Justinian's laws refer to them as joint sovereigns. She received ambassadors, influenced policy, and issued her own edicts. In 532, during the Nika riots, rebels nearly overthrew Justinian. He prepared to flee. Theodora stopped him. She gave a speech saying, "Purple makes a fine burial shroud." She convinced him to fight. Her courage saved his throne. She used her power to help women. She passed laws against forced prostitution, created safe houses for former sex workers, and expanded women's rights in divorce and property. Theodora disguised her humble, scandalous past behind imperial purple and ruled as the equal of an emperor. When she died in 548, Justinian was devastated. He never remarried.
Rani Lakshmibai. Learned to ride horses and fight with swords as a child, unusual for a girl in 19th century India. At 14, she married the Maharaja of Jhansi. When he died in 1853, she should have become a quiet widow. The British East India Company had other plans. They refused to recognize her adopted son as heir and annexed Jhansi. Lakshmibai petitioned the British, arguing legally and diplomatically for her rights. They ignored her. In 1857, when the Indian Rebellion erupted, Lakshmibai initially tried to remain neutral. But when rebels killed British officers in Jhansi, the British blamed her. She realized they'd never let her rule peacefully. So the 29-year-old queen went to war. Lakshmibai personally led her troops. She trained and commanded an army of women guards. When British forces besieged Jhansi with 1,500 men and heavy artillery, she defended the fort for 2 weeks. When the walls were breached, Lakshmibai made a legendary escape. She tied her adopted son to her back, jumped on horseback, and broke through British lines. She continued fighting for months. British reports describe her leading cavalry charges dressed in men's clothing, sword in hand, fighting like any of her male soldiers. In June 1858, during a battle, Lakshmibai was shot. She refused to let the British capture her body. She ordered her men to cremate her immediately on the battlefield. She was 29 years old. The British officer who fought against her wrote, "She was the bravest and best military leader of the rebels." Lakshmibai became a symbol of Indian resistance. She didn't disguise who she was. She disguised herself as a man only when necessary to fight, and she fought until the end.
She was 12 when she married King Edward II of England. She was beautiful, intelligent, and daughter of the King of France. But her husband barely noticed her. He preferred his male favorites, especially a man named Piers Gaveston. For years, Isabella played the role of the dutiful queen. She gave Edward 4 children, including a son and heir. She smiled at court. She stayed quiet while her husband showered wealth and attention on his lovers. But inside, Isabella was planning. In 1325, she traveled to France on a diplomatic mission. Once there, she refused to return. She took a lover, Roger Mortimer, an exiled English nobleman. Together, they gathered an army. In 1326, Isabella invaded England with a small force. She expected resistance. Instead, English nobles flocked to her side. Everyone hated Edward's current favorite, Hugh Despenser. Isabella's army grew as she marched. Edward's support collapsed. He fled, but Isabella's forces captured him. She forced him to abdicate in favor of their 14-year-old son, Edward III. Then she had Edward II imprisoned in Berkeley Castle. In September 1327, Edward II died in prison. Official story? Natural causes. Rumors, he was murdered, possibly with a red-hot poker in a horrific execution designed to leave no marks. Isabella and Mortimer ruled England through the teenage king for 3 years. They executed enemies, seized lands, and lived lavishly. But Isabella had taught her son too well. In 1330, at age 17, Edward III staged a coup. He had Mortimer executed and sent Isabella into comfortable retirement. She lived another 28 years in luxury, never punished for her actions. The she-wolf had disguised her ambitions for years, then struck when everyone underestimated her.
Joanna. She wasn't mad. That's the first thing you need to know. She was the daughter of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, the most powerful monarchs in Spain. Smart, educated, and heir to the throne. At 16, she married Philip the Handsome, Duke of Burgundy. It was a political marriage, but Joanna fell passionately in love. Philip didn't feel the same. He cheated constantly. Joanna became obsessively jealous. When Philip died suddenly in 1506 at age 28, Joanna was devastated. The famous story says she refused to bury him and traveled with his coffin for months. That's when they called her mad. But here's the truth. Joanna's father, Ferdinand, wanted to rule Castile himself. With Joanna declared insane, he could rule as regent. Her son Charles also benefited. If his mother was mad, he could inherit her kingdoms. In 1509, they locked Joanna in a windowless room in Tordesillas Castle. She was 30 years old. She would stay imprisoned for 46 years. During that time, 2 kings ruled in her name. First her father, then her son Charles V, who became Holy Roman Emperor. Joanna was the legal Queen of Castile, but she ruled from a prison cell she was never allowed to leave. Occasionally, officials visited to make sure she was still alive. Some reported she seemed perfectly sane. Others said she was unstable. But nobody freed her. When rebels rose up in 1520, they tried to rescue Joanna and restore her to real power. She refused to cooperate. Maybe by then she really had gone mad from decades of imprisonment. Or maybe she knew they'd just use her too. Joanna died in 1555 at age 75, still imprisoned. She was Queen of Castile for 49 years. She never ruled a single day.
Empress Matilda, the daughter of King Henry I of England. When her brother died in a shipwreck, she became her father's only legitimate heir. Henry made his barons swear to support her as queen when he died. But when Henry died in 1135, the barons broke their oath. They crowned Matilda's cousin Stephen instead. England had never had a ruling queen. They weren't about to start. Matilda was furious. She invaded England in 1139 and started a civil war called the Anarchy that would last 19 years. In 1141, Matilda actually won. She captured Stephen at the Battle of Lincoln. She marched to London to be crowned England's first queen regnant. But Matilda made mistakes. She alienated the nobles with her arrogant behavior. She demanded heavy taxes. Londoners rioted, and she had to flee before her coronation. Then came her most famous escape. Matilda was besieged in Oxford Castle in winter 1142. Stephen's forces surrounded her. There was no way out. Matilda disguised herself in a white cloak and cape. On a snowy night, she and 3 knights rappelled down the castle walls. They walked across the frozen Thames River, invisible in their white clothing against the snow.
They traveled 6 miles on foot to safety. Matilda never became queen. She eventually gave up and returned to Normandy. But she'd negotiated a deal. When Stephen died, her son Henry would inherit the throne. In 1154, Henry II became king. Matilda had won after all. She spent her last years as the king's mother, finally wielding the power she'd fought for. She just had to do it through her son instead of in her own name.
Eleanor of Aquitaine, the richest woman in Europe, Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right. At 15, she married Louis VII of France, becoming Queen of France. She went on crusade with him, scandalizing Europe by riding dressed as an Amazon. The marriage fell apart. Eleanor wanted adventure and power. Louis wanted a pious wife. In 1152, they divorced, shocking for the time. Eleanor kept her lands. 8 weeks later, she married Henry, Duke of Normandy, who soon became King Henry II of England. Eleanor was Queen of England now, even more powerful. She had 8 children with Henry, including the future kings Richard the Lionheart and John. But Henry took a mistress, Rosamund Clifford. Eleanor was humiliated. Worse, Henry started planning to disinherit their sons and give everything to his illegitimate children. So Eleanor did something extraordinary. She encouraged her sons to rebel against their father. She helped plan the revolt, a queen, turning her sons against the king. Henry discovered the plot. In 1173, Eleanor tried to escape to France, disguised as a man. She was captured. Henry locked her up. For 16 years, Eleanor was imprisoned. She was kept in various castles, moved around so she couldn't gather support. She was allowed visitors and maintained some dignity, but she was absolutely a prisoner. During those years, Henry ruled England and Eleanor's Aquitaine. She was a ruling duchess, locked in a tower, while her husband controlled her lands. When Henry died in 889, their son Richard immediately freed her. At 67, Eleanor became the real power behind Richard's throne. When he went on crusade, she ran England. When John became king, she kept him in power. Eleanor died at 82, still politically active. She'd spent 16 years as a political prisoner, but she outlasted all the men who'd tried to control her.
Kudelin, the great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan and daughter of Kaidu, a powerful Mongol lord, she grew up learning to ride, shoot, and fight. By her teens, she was the best wrestler in her father's army. Marco Polo wrote about her. He said she was so strong and skilled that no man could defeat her in combat. Kudelin rode into battle beside her father, charging enemy lines and plucking enemy warriors off their horses like picking apples. But Kudelin's father wanted her to marry. She was royalty. She needed a husband. Kudelin agreed with one condition. Any man who wanted to marry her had to beat her in wrestling. If they lost, they'd give her horses. Thousands tried. Princes, warriors, nobles all challenged her. The stakes were 10 horses, then 100, then eventually 1,000 horses for a single match. Nobody beat her. Not once. Kudelin accumulated 10,000 horses from defeated suitors. She became one of the richest people in the Mongol Empire without ever marrying. Her father wanted to make her his heir. She was his best general and most trusted advisor, but the Mongol chiefs refused. They wouldn't accept a woman as their Khan. Eventually, political pressure forced Kudelin to marry. She chose her own husband, a man who understood she'd always be a warrior first. She continued fighting beside her father until his death. After Kaidu died, Kudelin tried to claim power, but her brothers pushed her aside. She died around age 46, possibly assassinated. But for years, Kudelin had ruled in everything but title. She commanded armies, advised her father, and defeated every man who challenged her. She disguised her power as daughterly duty while actually running military campaigns, and nobody could beat her at her own game.